My name is Talia, and I am 28 years old. The number feels significant, a milestone that should be marked by something more than just the passing of time. It should be a declaration of the person you've become. That's why, for this birthday, I decided to craft a moment of pure, unadulterated beauty. I booked the entire back room at Harbour Finch in Dublin, a place I had loved for years, with its dark wood and the soft, briny scent of the Liffey that seemed to cling to the air. I paid in full, a detail that was important to me. It wasn't about the money, but about the autonomy, the ability to create a perfect evening on my own terms. I specified candles, dozens of them, to cast a warm, flickering glow, and I ordered cream roses, their petals the color of old ivory and whispers, because they spoke of an elegance that felt both timeless and deeply personal. This was to be my sanctuary, a curated space of my own making. The evening began as I had envisioned. The room was stunning, the soft light smoothing the edges of everything, making the world seem gentle. Laughter bubbled up. The clinking of glasses was a cheerful percussion, and for a fleeting hour, I allowed myself to believe in the fiction we were all collectively performing. The reveal of the cake was supposed to be a surprise, a small, theatrical moment where the server would wheel out my chosen creation, a simple, elegant dark chocolate torte, and the room would erupt in genuine, celebratory cheer. It was a script I had written in my head, a perfect little scene. But my family has never been one for following my scripts. The server was momentarily delayed, and in that gap, my sister Rowan seized the stage. She emerged from a shadowed corner, a look of triumphant mischief on her face, wheeling a trolley herself. On it sat not my dark torte, but a garish, bubblegum pink cake, the color so aggressively sweet it felt like an assault in the muted room. The icing was thick and white, and scrawled across the top in a looping, childish font were the words, "Biggest disappointment." The laughter that followed was not the gentle, warm sound from moments before. This was a different creature, a sharp, barking, unified sound of complicity. It wasn't a chuckle at a misunderstood joke. It was a roar of validation for her statement. It was the sound of a wall, solid and high, being built around me in an instant. My cheeks flushed with a heat that had nothing to do with the candle flames. My heart hammered a frantic, trapped rhythm against my ribs. But my face did what it has been trained to do for 28 years. I smiled. I smiled because I had learned to. I learned it as a child when my achievements were met with shrugs and my failures with pointed sighs. I learned it as a teenager when my preferences in music or books were labeled weird or trying too hard. I learned it through countless family gatherings where my quietness was interpreted as judgment and my excitement as melodrama. The smile was my armor, my concession, my white flag. It was the easiest way to drain the moment of its power, to show them that their barb couldn't possibly reach me, even if it had already struck its target deep in my soul. It was a performance of immunity, and I was its weary, veteran actress. And then, as if the universe itself was directing this cruel play to ensure I missed not a single cue, I felt a nudge under the table. My cousin, sitting to my left, her own face a mask of neutral amusement, slid her phone toward me. Her eyes didn't meet mine. She just stared straight ahead at the pink monstrosity of a cake, but her finger tapped the brightly lit screen. It was the family group chat. The messages were fresh, sent just as Rowan was pushing the cake into the room. One read, "Here we go." Another said, "Let's see how this plays out." And then, the one that finally made the air leave my lungs in a silent, pained rush, wishing Talia luck not making it weird. In that moment, the performance I had been putting on for years became a physical weight on my shoulders. It was no longer just an act, it was a leaden cloak. The smile on my face felt fossilized, a brittle relic. The laughter around me became a distant, muffled roar, like the sea heard from inside a locked car. I saw them all then, not as my family, but as an audience I had been desperately trying to entertain my whole life, an audience that had always found my performance lacking. The candles, the cream roses, the carefully chosen wine, it was all just set dressing for a play where I was the perpetual punchline. The weight of it was immense, crushing, and I knew, with a terrifying and sudden clarity, that I could not carry it for 1 second more. I stepped outside, finally alone. The transition was jarring. One moment I was in the suffocating, warm cacophony of the restaurant, and the next, the heavy door of the Harbor Finch swung shut behind me, plunging me into the cool, damp silence of a Dublin night. The air was a physical relief, a clean, sharp contrast to the thick, perfumed haze inside that had suddenly become toxic. I could hear the distant hum of the city, the lonely cry of a seagull, the gentle lapping of the Liffey against its walls, sounds that were impersonal and indifferent, and in that indifference, I found my first taste of solace. No one was laughing out here. No one was watching me. I walked away from the entrance, my heels clicking a solitary, purposeful rhythm on the cobblestones, until I found a dimly lit bench overlooking the dark water. I sat, the cold of the iron seeping through my dress, a grounding sensation that pulled me further from the feverish heat of the performance I had just left. The weight was still there, that leaden cloak of pretense, but out here, in the vastness of the night, I could finally shrug it off. I opened my notes app. The blank, white screen glowed in the darkness, a digital confessional. This was where I stopped pretending. I didn't write an emotional rant. I didn't pour out my hurt or my anger. Instead, I began to type a single, stark heading, facts. And beneath it, I started to list the things I knew, the anomalies I had rationalized, the oddities I had explained away for the sake of peace. The clues had been there for months, glitches in the matrix of our family life, blinking red lights I had chosen to ignore because acknowledging them would mean dismantling the entire foundation of my world. My mother, Mara. Months earlier, a contact at a venture capital firm had messaged me, a casual, "Great to see your deck making the rounds. Your mother forwarded it to us, such a supporter." My heart had stuttered then, a quick, nervous flutter. I had pushed the feeling down. When I'd confronted her, her response had been a masterpiece of gaslit offense. "I was just so proud of you," she had said, her voice dripping with wounded pride. I was bragging. Is that a crime now? Should I not be proud of my daughter? She had made me feel petty and secretive for wanting to protect confidential business information. I had apologized. I had let it go. It was easier than facing the alternative. And my brother, Cade. Just the night before my birthday, my phone had chirped with a security alert. An attempt to access my shared cloud folder, the one labeled Talia Ventures, had been flagged from his IP address. The attempt had failed. My passwords were strong. I remember staring at the notification, a cold trickle of unease running down my spine. But then, I'd concocted an excuse for him. Maybe he was trying to find old family photos, I'd told myself. Maybe it was an accident. I had silenced the alert and poured myself a glass of wine, actively choosing ignorance over the ugly truth it hinted at. Sitting on that bench, with the proof of their public ridicule fresh in my mind, the scales finally fell from my eyes. The forwarded pitch deck wasn't pride, it was sabotage. The folder attempt wasn't a mistake, it was reconnaissance. The birthday cake wasn't a joke, it was a public indictment. These were not isolated incidents. They were chapters in a consistent, coordinated narrative designed to undermine me. A new energy surged through me, cold and clear and sharp as a surgical scalpel. The grief and humiliation began to crystallize into something else, a furious, focused resolve. I stood up from the bench, my body humming with purpose. I didn't go back inside. I simply walked away, the sounds of the restaurant fading behind me, and hailed a taxi. The city lights streamed past the window, but I didn't see them. I was already home, in my silent apartment, booting up my laptop. Fueled by this cold clarity, I spent the night digging. It was not an emotional excavation, it was a forensic one. I became a digital archaeologist, sifting through the layers of our shared history. I cross-referenced dates and times. I pulled server logs I had access to from my own company's security portal, tracing the digital footprints left behind. I followed the email trails, the forwarded messages I had dismissed, now viewing them with the cold eye of a detective. Each click of the mouse, Each new piece of data uncovered was another brick removed from the wall of the fantasy I had lived in. And then I pulled my credit report. I had avoided it for years, naively trusting that my financial life was my own. The document loaded on my screen, line after line of cold, hard facts. And there they were. 4 credit cards. Opened over the past 18 months. Accounts I had never applied for, never touched, never seen. The addresses were slightly varied, but they were all linked to my name, my date of birth, my personal public service number. The spending was methodical, just under limits that would have triggered more urgent alerts. It was a slow, deliberate bleed. I tallied the numbers on a separate screen, my fingers steady on the keyboard. The final figure appeared, stark and undeniable in the dawn light that was now creeping through my window. Total damage, 19,800 euros. By dawn, I had it all. The access logs, the email trails, and that fresh credit report. The evidence was compiled in a neat, brutal folder on my desktop. I sat back in my chair, the first rays of the sun painting my room in a soft, innocent light. The city was waking up to a new day, but my old life was over. The number, 19,800 euros, glowed on the screen. It wasn't just a figure of financial loss. It was a quantification of their entitlement, their disrespect, their betrayal. The number stared back at me, a stark, arithmetic confirmation of the gut-wrenching betrayal I had felt in that restaurant. The performance was over. The unraveling was complete. Now it was time to build something new from the threads of truth I held in my hands. I did not scream or cry. The time for that, the raw, messy, human reaction to heartbreak, had passed somewhere between the first credit card statement and the final, damning email trail. The woman who would have screamed had been left behind on the bench by the Liffey. The woman who would have cried had been dissolved by the cold light of dawn on her laptop screen. What remained in her place was something quieter, harder, and infinitely more focused. A deep, resonant calm had settled in my bones, a stillness that felt like the eye of a hurricane. The emotional storm had raged and exhausted itself, and now, in its wake, there was only the clear, unimpeded path forward. I acted. The first moves were administrative, almost clinical. I filed fraud alerts with the credit bureaus. The process was methodical, a series of forms and automated verification calls. I recited my personal public service number, my addresses, the specific details of the fraudulent accounts. My voice was even, a flat, professional monotone. I was not a victim reporting a crime. I was a system administrator correcting a critical error in a database. Each submitted form, each confirmation email that landed in my inbox, was a brick I was laying in the foundation of my new reality, a reality built on legal and financial sovereignty. Next, I turned my attention to Rowan's world. Her podcast was her pride, her public persona, the platform from which she dispensed her curated wisdom on life and success. It was funded by brands, by companies that cared about their image and their association with wholesome, trustworthy influencers. I composed emails to the brands sponsoring her podcast. They were not emotional appeals. They were brief, professional, and devastating. I introduced myself, stated my relation to Rowan, and explained that I was providing documentation relevant to her ethical conduct and financial integrity. I attached the digital logs, the proof of the credit cards, the evidence of the systemic campaign to undermine me. I did not editorialize. I did not accuse. I merely presented the data and suggested they might wish to review it for their own risk assessment. I was not a sister seeking revenge. I was a whistleblower providing a public service. Then, I prepared my most public act. I opened the social media platform I used for my professional network. My cursor hovered over the compose button. I took a slow, deep breath, not out of hesitation, but out of a need for absolute precision. What I was about to do was not a cathartic purge. It was a strategic deployment of truth. I posted a clean, factual thread titled Only Facts. The title was my thesis, my promise, my boundary. The thread itself was a masterpiece of restraint. It contained screenshots of the credit report, the relevant account numbers and dates neatly highlighted. It contained timestamps from the server logs showing the unauthorized access attempts. It contained transfer receipts linking the payments from the fraudulent cards to various accounts. I arranged them in a logical, chronological order, a silent narrative that built its own irrefutable case. There were no names, no family photos, no nostalgic references to betray the personal nature of the crime. There were no insults, no dramatic accusations, no pleas for sympathy. I was not telling a story. I was presenting evidence. It was just undeniable proof, laid out for any objective observer to see and judge for themselves. I hit post and closed the laptop. The truth was no longer my burden to carry alone. It was now an entity in the world, and it would find its own way. I did not refresh the page. I did not monitor the likes or the comments or the shares. I made myself a cup of tea and watched the rain streak down my window pane. The silence in my apartment was profound, a sanctuary I had carved out for myself. The world outside that silence began to react with a swift, brutal efficiency that was almost beautiful to behold, even from a distance. The consequences were swift. My phone, set to silent, began to light up with notifications. First came the messages from mutual acquaintances, their texts a blur of shock and morbid curiosity. I ignored them. Then, a news alert popped up on my screen from an industry blog I followed. By lunch, a campaign had dropped her. The headline was succinct, a dry piece of corporate news about a brand reevaluating a partnership alignment. I felt nothing but a faint sense of validation, the same feeling an engineer gets when a complex calculation finally checks out. The notifications continued. My phone screen became a strobe light of silent, frantic activity. More brands began to issue statements. The thread was being dissected. The evidence was being verified by strangers online who took a grim pleasure in digital detective work. The story was no longer about me. It was about the facts I had released, and facts are resilient things. By evening, my phone buzzed with a call from a number I recognized as the main line for my aunt's prestigious firm. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a news article appeared, citing unnamed sources. HR at my aunt's firm had opened an inquiry into company email misuse. The article hinted that corporate resources had been used to facilitate personal and potentially fraudulent activities. The system, once triggered, was following its own cold, procedural logic. My phone continued to ring. Rowan, my mother, my brother, my aunt. Their names flashed on the screen, one after the other, a rotating carousel of my former life. I watched them appear and disappear, the screen lighting up and then fading to black, over and over. I did not answer their calls. There were no words left to say. Any conversation would be a negotiation, a chance for them to manipulate, to gaslight, to play on old loyalties and frayed emotional bonds. I had moved beyond the realm of words. They existed in a world of messy, complicated feelings. I now resided in a world of clean, simple consequences. My silence was my final word. It was not a word of anger or of hate. It was a word of closure. It was the period at the end of a very long, painful sentence. 2 weeks later, I signed new papers at the registry office. The room was quiet, sterile, and filled with a solemn light. The air smelled of old paper and lemon-scented cleaner, a scent of officialdom and finality. The wooden surface of the desk was cool and smooth beneath my wrists as I leaned forward to put my name on the dotted lines. Each signature was not a scratch of ink, but a deliberate, unhurried cut, a surgical severance of the financial and legal ties they had exploited. There was no fanfare, no dramatic pronouncement. It was a quiet, administrative act, but it held the weight of a decree. With every stroke of the pen, I felt a phantom string, once pulled taut with obligation and manipulation, snap and fall away. I was not just changing my details, I was legally codifying the boundary I had already built around my life. With the formalities complete, I left Dublin. I did not look back at the skyline as the train pulled away. My gaze was fixed ahead, on the unfolding landscape that softened from urban gray to the wild, lush green of the west. I had rented a small place near Galway Bay. It was not grand, but it was mine in a way no other space had ever been. Its windows looked out over the water, which changed from moody slate to brilliant silver depending on the light. The sound of the wind and the gulls was my new soundtrack, a constant, honest conversation with nature that asked nothing of me and demanded no performance. On my first morning there, I unpacked a single blue pot, the color of a summer sky. I filled it with dark, rich soil and planted a sprig of rosemary. The act was simple, almost meditative. I pressed the earth around the base of the slender plant, its piney scent clinging to my fingers. This was not just gardening. This rosemary was a symbol, a quiet promise I was making to myself. It was for remembrance, not of the pain, but of the lessons learned, a resolve to never again forget who I was or what I was worth. And it was for new growth, a testament to my own resilience, a living thing that would put down roots in this new soil, just as I was. I placed the blue pot on my windowsill, where it caught the morning sun, a small, vibrant testament to a future I was consciously building. Using part of the money I reclaimed, the 19,800 euros that was no longer a specter of betrayal but a restored resource, I launched a microgrant. It was for 5,000 euros, a tangible sum designed to make a real difference. It was specifically for founders who had been undermined by family. I did not want another entrepreneur to stare at a pink cake or a fraudulent credit report and feel that crushing isolation. I wanted to be the proof that someone, somewhere, would believe them without demanding they make it weird. It was my way of transmuting their poison into a remedy for others, of ensuring that the energy they had spent on my destruction would now fuel another's creation. Weeks later, I stood before a women in tech audience. The stage lights were warm, the air humming with quiet expectation. I spoke about resilience, about building a business on your own terms. And then, the question came, gentle but inevitable, from a well-meaning woman in the front row. How did you find it in your heart to forgive them? The room stilled, waiting for a story of spiritual grace and familial reconciliation. I looked out at their faces, these bright, ambitious women, and I told the simple, unvarnished truth. I did not. A slight ripple went through the audience. I continued, my voice calm and clear. I chose peace. I let the distinction hang in the air. Forgiveness, I had learned, was often a pressure put upon the wounded to expedite the comfort of everyone else. It was a demand to close a ledger that was not yet settled in your own soul. Peace was different. Peace was an internal state. It was the conscious decision to stop letting their actions live rent-free in my mind. It was the understanding that my serenity was not contingent on their apology or their transformation. I had severed the connection not with rage, but with the quiet finality of a gardener pruning a diseased branch to save the whole tree. I had chosen the peace of my Galway Bay mornings over the endless war of their approval. Some bridges burn. They are consumed by a necessary fire, leaving only ashes as a warning. Some become lighthouses. They stand as fixed, luminous points in the darkness, built from the wreckage of what was, guiding you and others away from the same jagged rocks. Mine did both. The bridge to my past was ash on the water, and from its remains, I had built a beacon. And now, looking out from this new shore, the water ahead looks wide and bright and full of limitless possibility.